the big area to focus on is on defense. We know that Prime Minister Takaichi is visiting the US or meeting with President Trump on the 19th of March. I think that should be the next major catalyst for the Japanese equities market. In areas where I think Japan has capabilities or has expertise that the US needs to reindustrialize, I think we should be expecting, like we've seen with previous summits involving Mr. Trump, we should see a flurry of announcements involving both Japanese companies and US companies around areas like reindustrialization, which I mentioned, factory automation, and then I think shipbuilding's a big one as well. Over the weekend, the US put out a new policy document around the restoration of US maritime dominance. And in that, Japan and South Korea are mentioned specifically as partners in that process.
First week of this month, when Japanese stocks began to rally in anticipation of Prime Minister Takaichi's victory, it looks like Japanese retail investors net sold around 400 billion yen worth of equity. So I'm just wondering, what will it take for them to come back or show more love for their home market versus U.S. or global equities? Or has Japanese stock market become a place for sort of fast money?
I don't think it's become a place for fast money. I mean, I think the main buyers of the Japanese market over the last 3 to 5 years have really been Japanese corporates, increasingly buying more of their own stock. And that really accelerated from 2023 onwards, when the Tokyo Stock Exchange was pushing or refocusing on corporate governance reforms. I think the interesting thing to focus on is really where foreigners go from here, particularly US or US dollar denominated investors. Last year, Japan outperformed the US on a dollar adjusted basis. This year, on dollar terms, and I haven't included today's move, but Topix is up 15% year to date in dollar terms. I think Nikkei is up 16% in dollar terms. S&P is flat for the year, and NASDAQ is down 2% for the year. So if you are a US dollar denominated investor, that type of outperformance from Japan is really starting to hurt you if you are underweight Japan. So, that's where we think the flows are going to come from. And if we look back historically, it's those periods where foreign flows in general and US flows in particular come back into the market. That tends to justify a level of multiple expansion at the index level, which drives the market higher.
And it sounds like you're expecting increase the level of foreign participation in the Japanese markets. And I wonder how much of a tactical move that could be, especially in 2026. People might want to sort of run away from the policy-induced, AI-induced volatility in the U.S. market. From your experience, Bruce, when they come back, they, as in foreign investors in the Japanese equities markets, do they tend to stay in the market for long term? What kind of view do you have in terms of the duration of their participation?
Thanks for the question. I think this thematic of geographic diversification out of the US, this is something that my colleague Peter Oppenheimer has been talking about at least over the last year. And it is something that we saw play out last year when you looked at where the US and the S&P had decent double-digit performance last year, but compared to Korea, compared to parts of Europe, compared to Japan, it did underperform. So, I think we should expect that, as you said, that move away from the US to continue to other parts of the world, and I think Japan would play an important part in that. Now, to answer your question about what do foreign investors do when they come back to Japan and the length of time they spend in the market, I think when we see US investors come back into the Japanese market, one sort of side effect of that is that we do tend to see Nikkei outperform relative to Topix. And I think one of the reasons behind that is that Nikkei has a number of sort of tech-related and AI-related stocks that tend to resonate quite well with U.S. investors. And that seems to drive that Nikkei outperformance. It's a lot more blue chip, a lot more growth related than say topics, which is more of a value feel to it. Now, to answer the second part of your question, I think around how long do foreign investors stay there or stay in Japan, I think it really depends on the underlying volatility of the market. The fact that we have seen foreign positioning gradually move up since Liberation Day last April is because we've not seen a serious correction, a greater than 5% correction in the Japanese market since April 2025. And if we look back over the last 3 years, these corrections tend to happen a lot more frequently. So if we are in a period where we're actually seeing a more stable market, perhaps because foreigners are positioning more from a structural point of view than a more opportunistic point of view, then maybe that could lead them to spend a lot longer in the Japanese market than they normally do.
And I think globally, right, market participants are trying to figure out which companies actually come out as winners and survivors in this era of artificial intelligence that we just don't know. And sure, you can get selective and really try to figure out who wins or which sectors are safe. But at the same time, Japan is actually a market that can actually benefit from that kind of AI-related fears. What's your line around that? That it's actually very industrials heavy, and some of the sectors that you point out, critical resources, shipbuilding, they are relatively AI safe, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the types of stocks that are under pressure in the US at the moment from this AI disruption focus, they tend to make up a lot smaller part of the overall Japanese market. So from a risk exposure point of view, I think Japan is less exposed than obviously the US and perhaps other markets. But I do think, as you were mentioning, I think there are areas around industrials, power generation, shipbuilding, factory automation, robotics, that Japan, these type of thematic, and defense as well, these type of thematics play very well to Japan's natural strengths. So I think as a safe haven, as an area where you could see increased cooperation between both the Japanese government and the U.S. government, I think one of the features of the election was that President Trump came in and officially endorsed Prime Minister Takaichi before the election, and he was one of the first world leaders to congratulate her officially afterwards. So it will be interesting to see how that relationship between Mr. Trump and Mr. Takaichi plays out in this latest Washington summit that we're looking at.